Chairman, members of the committee, William W. McCreevy is my name, and my family owns and operates Crystal Lake Cemetery located at 3800 Penn Avenue North, Minneapolis. And I have given a written objection to the clerk, so that is on record for you. The Crystal Lake Cemetery is a 140-acre cemetery located in North Minneapolis. And our objection is to the special assessment proposed for the construction project. The assessment, in our opinion, would greatly exceed any increase in market value of Crystal Lake Cemetery. It is also questionable that there would be any special benefit measured by an increase in market value to the cemetery or to the property. In our opinion, it is completely unfair and unreasonable to expect Washburn-McCreevy Cemetery Association to bear 40% of this $1.784 million price tag. The increase in market value to the cemetery is very minimal, if at all. And apparently the almost 40% would be our share would then equate to about $700,000. And the primary reason that we object to this is because we can't pay that bill. If we could, we would, in support of the community and in support of North Minneapolis, but it's impossible for us to do so. And we think that there's a miscalculation as well as to, if you look at the mapping and how it's allocated. In fact, I'll close in just saying that before we could pay a bill like this, we would be willing to give you Crystal Lake Cemetery as a gift to Minneapolis. And if you would prefer, we'll sell it to you for $1. As you could imagine, fewer and fewer people are using cemeteries, and it's a major responsibility to take care of a 140-acre garden when you've got snow removal, cutting of grass, maintaining of monuments and leveling of ground space, roads, replacing roads, fences, providing security. Just tree removals alone each year you can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars of trees that are going down because of the mature trees that we have. So it's a beautiful cemetery, but it's very expensive to maintain to even break even. And to make a profit at a cemetery today is not an easy thing. So we'd like to have you reconsider that special assessment and appreciate whatever you do. Any questions that you might have?
I don't see none, but I think staff will take up the calculations with you individually.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Nancy A. Skill. Please state your name and address for the record. Skilly.
Hi, my name is Nancy Skilly, and my husband and I have a small design firm. We have one employee, and we're on the corner of 42nd and Sheridan. My concerns, some of these are repetitious of other people's concerns. Last year, we were assessed over $2,500 for sidewalks, and I am concerned that we are being charged again for sidewalks. We would like a little clarification on that, please. I'm also curious where all this street parking is going to go after this takes place. I'm assuming there will be no street parking from what I've looked at on the map. My third point is that we did vote against the streetlights being replaced, and I don't know where, what the results of that were. I don't recall seeing anything come back. From neighbors, I've heard that it was voted down, but I'd also like to know if streetlights are part of that assessment. My last concern is that it appears the traffic lanes are going to reduce in size. And because of the amount of traffic there and the size of some of the vehicles, the buses, I am concerned safety-wise. I'm not quite sure what's going to slow down the traffic, but we've been there 31 years, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've seen a biker use the street in front of us. So I'm not sure that bike lane isn't going to cause a little bit more of a dangerous situation with traffic. And those are my concerns.
Well, thank you, and we will address them one by one. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you.
I now have Chris Hyatt.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I have been the property owner at 4151 for 12 years. And in that time, I purchased my home at the very top of the market. And shortly thereafter, the housing market came down quite quickly. And shortly thereafter, following that, we had a series of economic stimulus. And the reason why I bring this up is because that stimulus, of course, resulted in a flurry of rounds of quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve, and the price of goods and services subsequently went up, as I'm sure anyone who makes purchases can see. Beyond that, we had a tornado that came through North Minneapolis. Improvements were needed to be made by myself and some other people in and around the area of North Minneapolis. Then the Twins, they needed some money, and the Vikings needed some money. And the reason why I mention these things, they may seem not particularly germane, but these things happen incrementally, and slowly but surely it creates a burden upon working class people. And so when things like these assessments and stuff come up, it's yet an added burden to those particular individuals. In the time since I've been in my home, the Minneapolis Public Schools, they closed 15 different schools, and despite closing 15 different schools in Minneapolis and enrollment declining, they had a couple of levy referendums. They needed more money. Property taxes went up as a result. We had the Weber pool over there. When I moved in, there was a pool over there. It may have been a bit dated, perhaps, but instead of refurbishing the existing structure, it was torn down, and they put in a brand new natural water pool of sorts over there, and it was a great expense. So I'm of the belief that there are funds that can be allocated. I just don't have a lot of confidence in the manner in which the funds that are existing are being allocated. If I bear this assessment, those are improvements that I'm not able to make to my home. Having bought my home at the top of the market, a lot of the real estate market is rebounding in various different parts of the country, various different parts of Minneapolis. It's not really rebounding all that well in North Minneapolis. It's not rebounding yet for me. And so in order to be able to make improvements to continue living in my home, that I need to have revenue for myself. I need to have funds to be able to make those improvements so that I can either sustain the structure, it's 100 years old, so that I can sustain the structure, or make improvements to such an extent that I might perhaps be able to improve the value of my home and then subsequently sell it and move somewhere else. So in short, I guess what I'm saying is that this particular assessment on my property, coupled with all of those different things, little by little by little by little, has a great cost. And it's just not a cost that I'm willing to bear. I think it's easy for us to look at an artist rendering of what we can expect to see, but what is often overlooked is what is not seen. And what you won't see in an artist rendering is a new deck that I might put on my home, some landscaping I might put in my yard. There's no artist rendering for that. So I ask you to reconsider the assessment cost to these citizens of North Minneapolis And I don't really have anything further at this time.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. That's the last person who had signed in. Anyone else wish to come forward and give testimony to this project, make comment? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Andrea Holland, and I'm at 4155 Russell. I'm kind of speaking on behalf of my neighbor. She's on the corner, and I'm one house in. And basically, the people that are being assessed are the people right along 42nd and a half a house in. It's not a huge assessment for me, but it's astronomical to someone that lives on Social Security. And I guess with an assessment this large, I'm just not understanding why it's not split up amongst the neighborhood. This is a major thoroughfare between the freeway and Robbinsdale. And basically, you're asking people just along the thoroughfare to pay for that. And I think, simply put, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else wish to come forward?
I would also like to know when this is due and how it will be due. I'm under the impression that partial payments aren't accepted from the experience we went through with the sidewalks. So,
Okay, very good.
My name is Margaret Bach. I live on the corner of 41st and Russell. And of course, you know, I pay taxes on 2 streets. I can't use 2 streets at the same time. It's like a freeway from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 10:30. The other day, of course, just like I didn't have anything to do, I counted 36 cars back and forth in about 25 minutes. Am I allowed to complain? Anyhow, the school buses come from Patrick Henry. They go toward the drive. They come from the drive and they go toward Patrick Henry. We have a business on the corner, an oil station or a garage or something, and there's a tie-up all the time. The school buses can't even get by. The people across the street have 3 children, and they're 10, 11 years old. They have to be taken across the street. We can't get across the street. And another thing, I have perfect sidewalks, and they're not going to tear up the street and break up my sidewalks, and I pay for them the second time. I'm living on $1,200 a month, and that assessment is ridiculous. And then only 2 of us, like on the corner in the next house, are being assessed, and the rest of the block is not being assessed? Is that a form of discrimination? I'm really mad, and I'm Polish too. I can get worse. But I just don't think it's fair. So that would be 3 months of my income to pay that assessment. Have you people been on 42nd at all? Have you seen the traffic? And then the man on the corner, he's allowed to get a sign, please share the road. The only time I use 42nd is when I back out of the driveway. Everybody else uses it. And I think that's enough complaining, but would you please reconsider this assessment? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Anyone else wish to come forward?
Okay, John Thomas, 810 42nd Avenue. We've lived there for about 22 years. And what I've seen over the years, I hear about these assessments, about this and about that. And I always wonder who actually comes out and does them. Because honestly, I was shot about 10 years ago, so I sat on my porch for 8 months. And then we get a little thing saying, oh, we're going to put a cycle path in because people use this bicycle in 42nd. I counted them. There were 3 people in 2 months. So We actually finally got rid of our cycle path. We didn't need it. And now we're going ahead with this new thing. Okay, you'll dig the road up. With a bit of luck, you'll put new drains in. You'll resurface the road. Then somebody else will come along from a different department, dig another bit of the same road you just laid down. And this will probably drag on for about 18 months, 2 years. 42nd Avenue is a snow route. It's an emergency route. Leads directly to the bridge, the Camden Bridge there. Number one, most of the people there have been established people, a lot of retired people. They need parking. They need parking for emergency vehicles. What are we going to do then? Now, are we going to narrow the road? That road, if you were sitting there at 7 o'clock in the morning or any time after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, is as busy as 35 or as busy as 94. So what are we going to do? You know, a lot of these projections, people really need to come and assess what is actually going to happen. And the other thing I want to raise as well, we watched the top end of 42nd Avenue up towards Robbinsdale get ripped up, pulled aside, pretty lines painted down, pretty sidewalks. We put flowers here, we put flowers there, we plant trees. It's ridiculous. Literally ridiculous. You pave a road, you draw some pretty lines, and that 6 foot in the middle of the road never gets used. Why? Because there's a line either side. So the lady is dead right. We get buses, a lot of school traffic, a lot of pedestrians on the sidewalk, which I agree we need new ones because they are really bad. And I'm sure the city doesn't want to get sued over bad sidewalks. So that is right. But the time structure, what is the time structure of this? As you can tell by my funny language, I'm foreign, right? So what happens where I'm from is there is a time structure. There's a penalty clause if that time structure isn't met. I don't see that here. There's road construction down on Lindale at the moment. It was dug up just before the winter, and it's probably going to be there till the end of this year. So we can't get that way. So that's all I'm asking is, if this is going to happen, let's reassess what we are actually paying for. Let's get someone knocking the doors, talking to the people on 42nd, not just driving up there and sitting in a car having a cup of coffee and thinking this is what's happening. But talk to the people in the Camden neighborhood individually, find out what's happening, find out the circumstances. Let's do this before we start tearing the road up and making pretty lines and flowers and whatnots. And wire fancy lightings. Let's improve the neighborhood first. You know, we had the tornado. We got hit pretty bad. There were funds available then. A lot of this could have been done then. That's all I'm asking, for proper consideration for the people of Camden.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wish to come forward? Anyone else wish to come forward? See none, I will close the public hearing, and I believe we have a series of specific questions regarding parking, inclusion or non-inclusion of lights, lane width, scheduling of the assessment payment process, scheduling of the project itself, and what those parameters are. Just to have a few.
Thank you for all the testimonies. For the first question for parking, there's 3 commercial nodes on the project which contain parking. 2 of the commercial nodes will lose parking on one side of the street. Those 2 locations will be from Girard Avenue to Emerson Avenue. The north side of the road will lose parking. The same goes for Bryant to Lindale. Parking will be removed on the north side of the project. As for the lighting petition, the lady was correct. The petition failed. We sent out the petitions late last year, and the petition failed. As for, let's see my notes here. Timing of the project, we're looking for construction to begin sometime, hopefully late May or early June, depending on when we get the contractor on board. Also, another point I wrote down here was sidewalks. For the project, we are not replacing all the sidewalks. We know there's some new sidewalks. Depending on existing curb moves in or out or in, we'll try to save some of the sidewalk out there today. But there won't be new assessments for that sidewalk. It'll be based on the uniform assessments. And hopefully it covered in one more item there.
There was a question, do payments have to be made lump sum, or is there a staging of payments? I believe it's the latter, but you can clarify.
Oh, yeah. To my understanding, Suzette can jump into that there is a payment option, payment plan the payment can be deferred over 20 years for the project assessment.
Thank you. I think that covered a lot of it. In terms of the components of the project, those things were discussed through our normal public hearing process
Yes.
and community outreach process. Okay, very good. And then lane width?
The lane width, I think our current configuration is, it kind of varies, but we have a 13-foot travel lane. We're reducing that to a 10-foot travel lane width. So narrowing down the existing roadway quite around 6 feet, a lot of portions of the project.
And I believe you heard very specific questions about particular property assessments. Just in the previous project, is there a willingness to staff to work on an individual basis with those different property owners and the particular formulas that they're trying to figure out or struggle with?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can work with individual property owners with any questions they have about the assessments and reviewing for any irregularities.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I hope everyone will avail themselves of that. Councilmember Gordon?
And I'm not sure if I have any questions. It's always, it's interesting to hear people come in and testify about these assessments. And I did want to make sure that people understood that they are spread out over, I think it's 20 years. And if you are especially for seniors, sometimes we'll even extend that further. Is that correct?
I think this is a deferment plan, right?
No? Is that, what's the maximum deferment that we?
Chairman Reich and Councilmember Cam Gordon, there is a deferment program for senior citizens or disabled persons where the assessment can be deferred. No payment is required, but for as long as the assessment is deferred, interest does accrue. The maximum term for special assessments is 20 years.
And so with the deferment, would that mean it's still due in 20 years?
No,
Okay.
the deferment would apply for as long as the person has a hardship, for as long as the hardship exists, and for as long as the property is their homestead.
So if you were on a fixed income and that would represent a hardship because it was such a low fixed income, you wouldn't have to make any payments at all.
For as long as they stay at the property and the hardship exists.
Okay, so I hope that was clear. And then just typically, if it's anything over $150, that's spread out over 20 years.
That's correct. Yes, and
But there is interest.
anything less than 150 is a 1-year assessment.
I appreciate that. I also just wanted to note that the total cost for the reconstruction is close to $12 million. I think it's over $12 million, and the assessment is about 1.7. So this is something that everybody for, I don't know, the last 20, 30, 40 years in Minneapolis has gone through. When there's a reconstruction in front of their house, they bear a certain percentage of that cost. But then we also get to ride around on all the streets that are also in the city that we didn't actually pay a special assessment for, but we did pay out of general property taxes to support those streets. So in a way that has helped me think about it when my street's been done in front of my house, because I realized, well, I wasn't assessed for anything throughout the city. At the same time, whenever this comes up, I wonder if this is really the best way to do it. I think that it does get people's attention when you're reconstructing the street in front of their house, so they're maybe more involved, more engaged, and they care a little bit more about it. But I wonder if there are some cities that do all the street reconstructions out of their general fund. This is kind of for us up here as a policy. I've been here for 10 years. We've never really reviewed this policy very thoroughly. We've looked at the percentage, I think, for resurfacing and those things. But I'm curious about if there might not be a fairer, better way to do it in the end, because this assessment can turn out to be fairly regressive in certain areas, and it makes it much easier for some people to want to have a street assessment in their area because they're maybe wealthier, and that kind of assessment doesn't impact them as much. The fact of the matter is, our assessment's the same no matter how much money you make, unless you have the hardship, and then we offer a deferment and we have some. So it turns out to be what we like to call, as elected policymakers, a fairly regressive assessment or tax. So it's a concern I have, but it's just it's a small percentage of the overall cost of the construction, and I think that that's to our credit, we've been able to raise a lot of money from other funds and other sources to pay for this, and I really appreciate that, and I actually appreciate the design. I think this is a major connection, and I think this is going to help calm the traffic and make it a much safer street too, from the way I'm understanding it. Of course, it's not in my ward, but that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I'd like to defer to the council member of the area in which this is impacted, and then I can come back in queue.
Okay, as you wish. Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all my constituents that came down today to speak about this, and I know it's really challenging, and one of the things that I think we should think about as a city is trying to make our process of the influence zone, when we explain that to people, more easily understood. I worked for the city. I've been representing this area for a very long time, and that wasn't the way we did things when I first came here. The influence zone is fairly newer, but it's really hard to explain to people. And actually, at the public hearing, the assessment hearing, one of the neighbors had a really good explanation about the total cost of the project and the percentages that came from each funding source. And her point was that the amount of money that came from the assessments would be the same based on the same number of properties across the city, and that was helpful. So I just think it's always language about how you explain things. I do think it's really important to reconstruct this road. If you look at this road, when you get to the Lindale Avenue part of the project, you can actually see the original pavers that were paved the street originally, probably 100 years ago. It's a major arterial, as Mr. Thomas said. It connects Victory Memorial Parkway to the Camden Bridge, so it's the access to Northeast Minneapolis for the grand rounds. It's really a very lovely road, and I thank Mr. McGreevy for selling us some land to do a flood control project years ago. Crystal Lake Cemetery sold us some land, and we have this Camden Central Pond there that is across the street from Patrick Henry's athletic fields and their athletic facilities. And our public works people built a beautiful path around that pond, and people use it to walk their dogs all the time, take a walk. It's really a lovely place. So it's a major thoroughfare in North Minneapolis, and I appreciate people's concerns about the traffic issues on the street. I think it's important for my constituents to